we did DARPA in 1958, we need a DARPA for energy, or ARPA-E, because given the gathering storm that are happening in energy and environment and sustainability, we need to take some quantum leaps in technologies, because incremental improvement can only get us so much. So this went into Congress. Congress took that very seriously and created in 2007, under President Bush, and President Bush signed it, what is called the America Competes Act, which authorized, illegally authorized formation of ARPA-E. But there was no money in it. Now, as some of you know who have been in government, they said you can authorize as much as you want. Unless you put money, nothing really happens. So nothing happened while he was still in office. But then President Obama won, and Secretary Chu was was nominated and confirmed by the Senate to become the Secretary of Energy. Now, it so happens that Secretary Chu was also part of this committee that recommended ARPA-E. And at that time, he didn't wear so many ties, as you can see, and he was smiling more. So he was obviously very interested in now creating ARPA-E, which was then launched in April by the President at the National Academy, and it was launched in April of 2009. And then I got recruited by the President and the Secretary and confirmed by the Senate, and by October I was there. So that was the formation, and the mandate was to do what DARPA did for defense and information. You got to do it for energy. So I'm going to give you a few examples of technologies that that we invested in. And if you're interested, I can give you the whole business model of how we went about this agency, because there are some best practices that we found that actually helped us a lot. Let me start with stationary energy systems. How do we produce electricity, and what is the cost? This is a graph from Bloomberg New Energy Finance. And there's a lot of details. I just want to highlight a few things. On the x-axis is the cost of producing electricity in dollars per megawatt hour, or you can convert it to cents per kilowatt hour or rupees per kilowatt hour. The cheapest way to produce electricity in the United States is natural gas combined cycle gas turbine. And these are 60% efficient. Natural gas is dirt cheap, and it costs you about $50 a megawatt hour, or 5 cents a kilowatt hour. That's the cheapest way to produce electricity. I also highlighted wind. Wind is at about $70 to $80 a megawatt hour, much lower than people had predicted. In fact, I didn't highlight it out here. It is actually cheaper than coal in many parts of the country in the United States, which is amazing. I also highlighted the photovoltaics, which today, at the utility scale, it's at about 114 cents a kilowatt hour, $140, $130 a megawatt hour or so. Now, I also want to highlight very small numbers you may not be able to see, is the ones in green, which is the percentage change over one quarter. This is the third quarter in 2012. And you can find that the PVs dropped 9% in one quarter, which is unheard of. So the cost of producing electricity from solar is going downhill, whereas that from coal and others are essentially stationary. And by the end of the decade, or maybe a few more years, we think this is going to be competing with natural gas combined cycle. And to enable that, we in Department of Energy created something called the Sunshot Initiative. This is what President Kennedy had for the space mission, the moonshot. This is for President Obama, the Sunshot. Not to go to the sun and return safely, but to reduce the cost of solar to $1 a watt fully installed, which is about $50 a megawatt hour. And one has to understand where it is coming from. This is the first, the little, the vertical is what happened in 2004. It's $8 a watt. In 2010, it was $3.8 a watt. And we wanted to target $1 a watt, which is about $50 a megawatt hour levelized cost of electricity. And there are three parts to this cost. One is the panel cost, which is the blue. The other is balance of system, installation, permitting, everything else. And then there's the power electronics. And the goal was to reduce the panel cost to 50 cents a watt, to reduce the balance of system to 40 cents and the power electronics to 10 cents. And thereby, you would get $50 a megawatt hour of electricity produced over 25 years or so. It turns out that today it is already at about 60 cents a watt. So as far as the panel is concerned, we're almost there. The big problem is the balancer system. And balances, so the question is there any technological knob to reduce the balancer system cost? And if the answer is yes, there is. And that has to do with efficiency. So if you look at the total dollars per watt cost, it's a manufacturing cost plus installation cost divided by efficiency. So the higher the efficiency, lower the dollars per watt. And so the question is, where are we? So this is what we were going, $1 a watt by 2020, LCOE, levelized cost of electricity, $50 megawatt hour. So where are we today in terms of efficiency? And these are the different technologies. In crystalline silicon production level, it's going on at about 25% today. And the theoretical limit, which those of you who are scientists and engineers will know something called the Shockley-Quasar limit. That is a theoretical limit for a single bandgap semiconductor p-n junction. And that is at about 29. The practical limit is 29%. That is crystalline silicon. Polycrystalline silicon, production level 16% today, 15, 16%, and there's room out there. The cheapest panels today are cadmium telluride. Today, they're at about 14% production level, which is for solar, 14%. And look at the headroom. There's another 14% to go before you reach the theoretical limit. So this cost, the total dollars per watt, is going to come down because perhaps not so much of panel manufacturing costs coming down, but the efficiency going up. And the big trick is, can you get to 25, 26% efficiency at the cost, manufacturing cost of today? And there's a lot of headroom out there. Just to give you one thing that the DOE supported. This is single junction. Multi-junction is a separate story. This is single junction gallium arsenide based. This is at 28% solar cell on plastic substrate. So it's not only just high efficiency, this is on lightweight, which also reduces installation cost, etc. This is just coming out of a startup company. So this is pretty amazing stuff happening. Of course, as we know, for solar, you need storage. And the storage target that we had was the target that you can get from pumped hydro. So pumped hydro, pumping water up a dam, the additional charge for storage is about 2 to 2.5 cents per kilowatt hour. And we said that why only pumped hydro? Why not compressed air? Why not flow batteries, etc.? And just to give you one example, we've invested in several different technologies. This is one just coming out of MIT, which is spun off into 24M, which is a startup company, which is targeting 1.5 cents a kilowatt hour in terms of battery performance. And this is taking the best of the chemistry of lithium ion in a completely new systems architecture of a flow battery and getting to 1.5 to 2 cents a kilowatt hour. Even if they get it to 2.5 cents a kilowatt hour, this is a game changer. This is modular, this is small. You can attach it to solar cells, etc. Talking about the grid, electricity grid, for the United States and for any country in developing economy, this is extremely important. In the US, we have about $1 trillion of assets on the grid, and our grid is aging, and which is an opportunity to really do something about it. And occasionally, we have things like this. We have blackouts. Okay, and I think from what I hear, India also had some blackouts. So the question is, okay, so you take this approach of a system as a whole and see how can we not only avoid blackouts, but also modernize it so that you can make it smart. And when we say smart, smart means many things to many people. And I won't go too much into detail. But the idea of demand response, supply response, and to automate it and make it real time. And really reduce the cost of electricity and reduce the wastage of electricity. At the end of the day, that's really what matters to consumers, is give me cheaper electricity, give me more reliable electricity, and make it more secure. So just to give you what the aging factor is, here's some data. This is a transformer, a distribution substation transformer, which is 8,000 pounds. It handles about a megawatt of electrical power. It operates at 60 hertz. In India, it would be 50 hertz. It's almost the same technology that Nikola Tesla used 100 years ago, more than 100 years ago. In the United States, the average age of these transformers is 42 years. And it's 2 years beyond its projected lifespan. So we are living on the edge in the US. There's a massive asset reallocation that's going to happen in the US. And the question is, are we going to take these old technologies and put it in there, or are we going to invest in new technologies? So just to give you an idea of a new technology very quickly, this is a single transistor made of silicon carbide, which is a semiconductor. It's out of a company called Cree, which can handle 15 kilovolts of voltage, 100 amps, 1.5 megawatts of electrical power, and Cree is now trying to modulate at 50 kilohertz. If you can do that, that 8,000-pound transformer becomes 100 pounds. And this becomes the heart, core of many power conversion technology, power management technology. The other question that one has to ask is the following. Today's grid came from our historic legacy of Tesla and Edison, AC and DC respectively. If solar electricity were the cheapest way to produce electricity during the times of Tesla and Edison, what would the grid look like? And the grid would look very different, because we don't have a centralized electricity generation. It's totally distributed. And so that is the opportunity for many developing economies, we feel, to leapfrog and leverage what we say is the perfect storm of technology and economics: solar, storage, communication, or the 1.5 billion people who do not have access to electricity today, and another 1.5 who have very limited access. So today's grid is one way. You got generation, you may or may not have storage. It's a legacy grid and goes to all the loads. A future grid may look something like this, that you have a microgrid with people taking essentially extension cords and having generators and loads locally. And these may be tied together and may use the legacy grid as a backup and have local generation. And this is something that I'm doing right now with Google. It turns out the operating system for this grid has not been written yet. How to balance it in real time, how to manage, how to make it robust in terms of changes, how do you maintain frequency at 50 hertz with all loads and supply changing all the time. That is not a trivial problem. So that operating system has not been written. And that's a really technological thing, but of course there's a business opportunity out here. Very quickly on transportation, I'll just give you some major trends. This is where the United States uses as fuel. Light-duty vehicles is about 60%, trucks is about 20%. That's a majority. And those are the options in terms of fuel: gasoline and diesel, natural gas, biofuel, electricity, in terms of powertrain, IC engine, batteries, etc. And today, we are overwhelmingly based on gasoline and diesel and IC engine. And that is changing right now. The biggest change that we have seen is the use of liquefied natural gas in long-haul trucking. And it turns out that you have to have cryogenic tanks for this. And it costs $100,000 to put extra cost for these trucks. But the fuel savings are such, the cost of natural gas is so much lower than diesel, that the fuel savings are $40,000 a year. So 2.5 years, it pays for itself. And fueling station, the payback period is also 2 to 3 years. So the private sector is now putting the network of LNG fueling station every 200 miles so that the long-haul trucks transition to natural gas, to LNG. And this is a major transformation that is happening, which is amazing. The other trend is electrification. And electrification is all about cost and range of electric cars. And so we put out a goal of electric vehicles comparable in range and cost without subsidies in the next 10 years. To do that, it all comes down to the battery. And just to give you an idea, some numbers. Today, the battery cost, current status, is about $600 to $650 per kilowatt hour, and the energy density is about $100 watt hour per kilogram of energy density. It's the density and the cost are the two major factors. If you are to get a 100-mile all-electric vehicle, the cost has to be half, and the energy density has to be double. So it's a factor of 4 totally. And we were wondering whether we'll ever get there. Just this year, there was an announcement by a startup company that we invested, NVIA, which has got a cell-specific energy of 400 watt per kilogram, which is the theoretical limit, approaching the theoretical limit of lithium-ion battery, so that the pack-specific energy is 200 watt per kilogram, which meets the 2022 goals, and the battery cost is about $200 a kilowatt hour, approximately, which matches the 2022 goal. So that battery is already there today in terms of in a lab. But now the question is, can we manufacture it and get into cars? That's happening right now. So this is a major shift. Very quickly about biofuels. All biofuels today are photosynthetic. And if you look at how we make biofuels, we take sugarcane, corn, algae, cellulose. In India, you took jatropha, and we make oil out of it. The problem with biofuels is the following. The conversion efficiency from sunlight to oil is less than 1%. No matter which way you go. It's just the nature of photosynthesis and something called the Calvin cycle. It's less than 1%, which is why you will need a lot of land, a lot of water, and that's why the cost goes up. So this is, I won't go into the details. If you look at what happens, the biofuels, the majority of the cost is feedstock because it's so dilute. It's in terms of the energy density of oil, the energy density in plants is very just light and fluffy. So the collection of that biomass into a centralized energy dense form is very difficult. You see, in oil, you can put a straw in the ground and under pressure the oil comes to you. Plants don't seem to do that. So you have to collect it, which is why in some countries people do this, which is not quite the scalable way. But in Brazil, they have mechanized it, just like they mechanize agriculture. And that's really the way to go. Or you fundamentally change the photosynthetic machinery in a plant, which is where the research that ARPA-E invested is to make photosynthetic much more efficient, which will not only be important for biofuels, but for food. There's another green revolution that Norman Borlaug started that is yet to be made, where you change the photosynthetic machinery and make it much, much more efficient. And that has not happened yet. Or we take a completely different approach, which is what we took in ARPA-E, where we created a completely new approach called Electrofuels. It turns out what biology does is it takes carbon dioxide from the air and uses the Calvin cycle, the photosynthetic machinery, to fix carbon dioxide and make carbon-carbon bonds. That's what biology does. But the Calvin cycle, which is associated with photosynthesis, is not the only way. There are many non-photosynthetic microbes that also make carbon-carbon bonds, but they don't live on sunlight and the photosynthetic machinery. So we exploited that in a completely new approach of taking electrons from solar or hydrogen sulfide, which is the waste product of oil and gas, or feed them hydrogen to these organisms. There are many of them. And if you program them right, it takes carbon dioxide, it lives on electrons, on electrodes, literally, and makes oil. That was the idea. And we realized that this would be 10 times more efficient than photosynthesis. And people thought, this is just nuts. You're going crazy. And we said, let's give it a try. And sure enough, in less than 2 years, this is the first oil, a biofuel that was made without the use of sunlight in darkness, using microbes that could make oil, and they're trying to scale it. I'm going to end in just the last slide with the following. Trying to give a holistic picture of this. I can keep on talking about innovation, but innovation is necessary but not sufficient. And it is very important to look at it holistically. I talked about the R&D to translate science into innovative technologies. That is early stage. And as I said, these have to go into manufacturing, into innovations. They have to manufacture, the cost has to come down, they need to scale up. And you need commercial deployment and you need markets. And the alignment of all this is extremely important. Okay, if they're not aligned, you can do all the innovation, they'll never reach the market if you don't have the money or if you don't have the markets. The amount of money that you need, as I said, also scales up by orders of magnitude. In the early stages, you can use, at least in the United States, we use government R&D for risky stuff, for research. But later on, for scaling and for deployment, you need the equity or the debt markets, hopefully from the public capital markets in the United States, to invest into the manufacturing and scale up and deployment. But you need the markets to do that. So this has to be looked at holistically. So sometimes, in the United States at least, we do one at a time. But we need to do all of them simultaneously so that everything is lined up and the trains are running. Any blockage of the artery out here will spill over. The innovations will go somewhere else, and we don't get the economic benefit of the investments in the early stage of innovation. So in the United States, we have various ways of creating markets. Some are regulatory signals, some are price signals. A good regulatory signal that the Obama administration has done is what are called the CAFE standards, fuel efficiency standards for transportation, where the signal was sent to the business community that we want 54.5 miles per gallon by 2025, which approximately is 25 kilometers per liter cars, average, corporate average, by 2025. Now that signal is now forcing the auto industry to go towards electrification, to go to lightweighting, to make more efficient engines, etc. And that innovation, actually eventually reduces the cost to the consumer, because that competition is very important. There are financial policies, I won't go into the details. We have a whole list of things. Tax policy, extremely important for public capital to flow into the investment for project finance, etc. And of course, there are other financial policies for manufacturing, etc. So this whole idea of using policy to line up to align the innovation and manufacturing and markets, extremely, extremely important. And that is something, and I think whichever country does that well will probably benefit a lot from the economic growth of some of these new technologies that are coming. And the countries that do not have the alignment will go in many different directions. So, and that's really the challenge that we have on the policy side to make the alignment proper. So let me stop out here, and thank you so much, and I'll be happy to answer other questions and so on.
Thank you, Dr. Majumdar. You, in fact, ended with perhaps the hardest problem, getting it all aligned up. But you've also given a lot of reason to think how we might get to a situation like that. What are the decisions that have to be taken, and who would be taking it? And it's not going to be one agency, one individual. And if we had to do something like ARPA-E in India, we have to think very hard about who would come together to make this happen. We don't have a Department of Energy. We've got about 8 different ministries dealing with energy. Plus, we've got another 8 or 10 different ministries dealing with water. So I'm sure there are questions. So let's open up the floor. Yes, Dr. Ahuja. There's a microphone coming away.
Thank you for a very interesting talk. I just want to know how many of these projects that ARPA-E funded were bottom-up and how many were top-down? That means what fraction bubble up from below and come to you, and how many do you go and target and then identify?
All of them are bottom-up. All projects are given based on a proposal that is written. It's a competition. And based on that, based on how they fare in the competition, the awards are made. What ARPA-E does is to provide what I would say the thought leadership. So I recruited people from the scientific community to join ARPA-E as program directors. And some of them provided the thought leadership on refrigeration and air conditioning without the use of refrigerants, which have major global warming potential. So this gentleman who I recruited from Intel came and joined ARPA-E, and he did his research in this whole area, and then he created a program saying that these are the targets I want to reach. I want to create refrigeration at the same cost, air conditioning and refrigeration at the same cost as today's air-conditioned refrigerators, but without using HFC at all. Okay? What are the challenges? And then people write proposals, and we look at all of them. And then based on the technical merit and the team, etc., we make decisions. So everything is bottom-up in that sense, but the top-down one is to provide the vision, is to provide the analysis saying that this is an area that there is a gap, there's a white space, and this is where we should be going, and get multiple communities, scientific communities, to come together and contribute as a team.
Sir, you had a question. And could I request you to introduce yourself?
My name is Sodi. I'm a former director with Indian Oil Corporation. I just want to know one thing. With the abundant availability of shale gas, will the picture undergo a change?
So I have some more data on shale gas. Shale gas is certainly changing the energy landscape in the United States. It has already changed and has continued to change. Yeah. Chemical manufacturing is coming because shale gas can be used, natural gas can be used as a feedstock for various kinds of polymers and things like that. So that is changing. Certainly the transportation is happening in the trucking. The big question is, can natural gas get into transportation in light-duty vehicles? You know, here it has happened because of Supreme Court mandates, etc. We don't have Supreme Court mandates in the United States. It has to happen based on economic arguments, and one of the big challenges is storage at low cost. And that's where ARPA-E has a new program on just that itself. So that's what will happen. In the electricity sector, you know, we used to get in the United States 50% of electricity used to come from coal and 20-something% used to come from natural gas. This year, for the first time, it is about 33, which we never had anticipated before. So it's already changing based on economic arguments. In the future, we have to be a little careful. There's a lot of euphoria about shale gas. But if you actually look at the data of when you actually drill and horizontal drill and produce gas, there's a peak in production and there's a long tail. We don't know how long the tail really is. So we have to be careful as to how much shale gas can we actually recover from these. We still don't understand how fracking really works down in the mechanics of fracking. We don't know all the details. So I think it's good to have this abundance and low cost, but there's a flip side to it. We may become too complacent, and I think, at least our view, my view is that we need to in parallel look at all the other technologies, but make the best use of our natural resource, make the most efficient use. And we got to do R&D for that.
Why don't we, there were a bunch of questions here. Let's just take them in a bunch, and then I'll come to this side.
My name is Kamal Mittal. Nice to meet you after 4 years. Delhi government is working on a project to reduce energy by 30% in the next 2 years. And we found that over half the energy which is currently used is used for pumping of water, sewage, or gas. So are there any thoughts which you have which immediately come to your mind on some ideas of how to implement some of those ideas for energy efficiency in Delhi?
Okay.
You had a question?
Yeah. I'm Ambud Sagar from IIT Delhi. Arun, I wanted to do, I guess you had 24M as one of your examples. I'm not sure if it's the same people who brought us A123. But the question I have is, and I think it might be the same group, the question I had is the following. You know, when A123 came out, it looked like this wonder technology. The company's now gone bankrupt. And so the question is, it really is a little bit of balance between the technology, performance and cost envelope. So that's, in a sense, what the technology can offer versus what the markets need to do, or the creation of the markets. Right now, the markets, the demand pool is really not there in a strong way to be able to pull technologies like that into large-scale commercialization. So I just want to get a feel of how do you see this balance playing out?
Right. Let me answer Kamal's questions first. In terms of efficiency for motors and pumps, there are many aspects to this. The technological side is that there is, we're probably seeing the renaissance of power electronics that is happening. Wide bandgap semiconductors, use of that for high frequency switching, AC to AC, DC to DC, efficient is coming on board. And once you have power electronics, you can design much more efficient motors, which has not happened. And today most of the motors are either induction motors or permanent magnet motors. And you can get into something like switch reluctance motors. And I won't go into the details of that. But those can be much, much more efficient. And I think that's an technological opportunity out there. But there's also the opportunity of, from energy efficiency side, when you're talking about appliances, is to create the market for it, which is, in the United States, we've done things like appliance standards. Appliance standards are one of the most cost-effective ways to introduce energy efficiency. Because what you do is you say that this is the bottom line. You can't go below this in terms of performance. And if they're carefully done, not only does it reduce the overall life cycle cost, it actually reduces the purchase price. People think that regulation increases the price, increases the cost to the consumer. It is actually just the opposite. Let me share with you some data on this. This is, it's worth pointing that out. Where is the data on that? Here. You see, this is refrigerators, room air conditioners. The blue data is the life cycle cost of energy. And the red data is the first cost to a consumer. Okay? And these arrows, the dash arrow is when the appliance standards was introduced in California. And then the solid arrow is when the federal, in the United States, the federal standards were introduced. And what is not surprising is that the life cycle cost comes down because you make